Okay, I think we're working. I seem to have audio meters, so thank you for sitting through all the technical difficulties. I'm so excited today to break down some Motion 5 beginner's course stuff. I see a ton of you in chat, so I'm super excited. Let me know if it's not working because it says, please check the video resolution. The current resolution is 1920 by 1080, which is not optimal. So I don't know what that means, but hopefully it's all working all right. There is going to be a little bit more latency in the chat. I wanted the refresh rate to be a little bit higher for you guys, so hopefully that's working okay. But anyway, audio is good, but the countdown is not synced. Isn't that wonderful? Okay, let's see. Okay, so yeah, I thought I would first kind of start out this session by kind of giving you an overview of what my history is with motion. So I actually only started motion about 2 years ago when I started the channel. I wanted to create some graphics for the channel, and I wanted to create some nice templates that worked, so that was kind of the idea there. Yeah, and it's been really fun. There is an immense amount of power in motion that I never thought possible before, and the more I use it, the more I'm just realizing that everybody needs to be using motion. So I'm super excited to be sharing this with you. I really hope this stream goes well. Everything went perfect in testing, and then today it's just lots and lots of problems. So that's how it goes. Anyway, I'm probably going to be responding more to comments at the end of the stream. So if you want to ask a question, if you can ask it with a Q and a colon, then I can kind of search through and quickly find the questions at the end of the stream. But yeah, it'll be about an hour of working in motion, and then there'll be a small question and answer period at the end of the stream. So anyway, hopefully everything's going good. It's looking solid to me. I'm gonna go ahead and switch over to my computer camera, and we'll hope that everything works great. So I'm gonna transition there, and it looks like it is showing up fantastically. Perfect. Okay, let me know if you guys aren't seeing anything, and I'm gonna try and keep an eye on chat as best I can. Also, there should be the comments happening, the questions happening on the screen there, so you can kind of read those if you're watching this stream later. So with that being said, let's go ahead and open up Apple Motion. Now, as I always say, if you don't get the project browser, you can push Command, Option, and N. And your project browser is where you should always start, because this is where you're going to set up if you want to create a plugin for Final Cut Pro, if you just want to create a motion project, anything like that. So I always like to start from here. For some reason with motion, sometimes if you close a project, it doesn't open the project browser. So just Command, Option, and N, or you can go up to File, New from Project Browser. Whenever you select a project, you're gonna have the opportunity to set different presets here. And I'm always gonna recommend that you try and set these presets to whatever you typically work with in your videos. So if you're always working 4K at 60 frames per second, then I recommend that you set that to 4K 60. As well as if you work at 1080 at 24, then always set it to 1080 at 24. It's gonna make it a lot simpler down the road. When you get into Final Cut Pro, there's less likelihood for something to go wrong. However, Final Cut Pro does an excellent job of reformatting stuff, reformatting the animation keyframes to work well within that 60 frames per second or 24 frames per second, or rescaling the resolution. It does a great job, but sometimes it doesn't always work. So I just generally recommend that you always set the presets to whatever you're usually gonna work with. And when you open up Motion, you're gonna see your motion project, Final Cut Effect, Generator, Transition, and Title. So these four options are actually what you're gonna use when you wanna create a plugin. Now, I generally am working within the Final Cut titles and the effects. Occasionally I'll make a transition. I don't use generators that often. However, generators and titles can almost be used interchangeably. There are a few slight differences, but I generally like working with titles because they're more compressed on a Final Cut Pro timeline. So I find it's a little bit easier to work with titles, and they're also higher up in the search, so that works also great for me. Okay. So what we're gonna actually do is, let's go ahead and first jump into we'll do a title first. So we open up this title. I'm gonna set my duration to 10 seconds or so. Whatever you set this duration to is whatever it's gonna show up in Final Cut Pro by default. So just keep that in mind. 10 seconds seems to be pretty solid. And just so this stream goes smoothly and that my computer doesn't get tanked, I'll set it to 1080p, and we can leave it at 2997 because the stream is happening at 30 frames per second. So we'll go ahead and push open. When you open up Motion, it should look something like this. Now, I'm gonna make a few recommendations for settings you might wanna change that might make your life a little bit easier. So if we go up to the top left and go up to Motion Preferences, you can see all of these extra options here. You can set your autosave amount, you can set your project cache, total of memory, all those important factors, especially as you get more advanced in Motion. As well as you can also take a look at the appearance settings here, which is very useful. You have your project settings, and you can actually set your default project settings here if you like. I haven't really actually messed with those very much, but you can also set default layer duration, and it uses the project duration or the custom duration. This is really helpful because when you bring in something into Motion, it's usually by default going to start it wherever your playhead is. So if I were to bring in a circle at this point, it's not set to it currently, but if I brought in a circle, typically it would actually create the circle from this point in Motion. And that drives me crazy because a lot of the time I want to have full control over exactly when it starts. And if it starts there, it's also going to trim off the end. So if I decide, oh, I want to slide this back, then I'm going to have to slide it back, go to the end, and re-extend it. So that's really annoying. So in Motion Preferences, I actually like to change this over to Create Layers at Start of Project. And then I like to use the custom or use the project duration. That way it's always going to be created at the full length of the duration. So that's kind of an option I like to use. I'm not going to get too into these other settings here. You can definitely take a look, and I do recommend you do so. Just make sure it's all set up to your liking. But another thing you should know about Motion that I honestly wish I would use more often, but I don't because I want everything to look default for my tutorials. If we go up to Window, we can change the window layout over to Cinema. Now, Cinema is really interesting. I feel like the layout is a little bit more like Final Cut Pro because your inspector is going to be here on the right-hand side instead of the left side. So if you're really struggling to wrap your mind around Motion, you may want to change it over to the cinema aspect ratio, or whatever you call it, the cinema layout, because then everything's going to line up just a little bit closer to what the Final Cut Pro project might look like. However, you're also going to have your layers panel over here. That being said, I like to leave things as default as possible for my tutorials just so everybody's on the same page. So I'm going to go ahead and change this back over to the classic layout just like so. So within the classic layout, you have several different panels here. On the far left is your library, and this is where you're going to access stuff like filters, generators, replicators. You can basically see all of the different objects that are right here. Within that library is also the inspector, and your inspector is where you're going to change all of the different parameters of your objects. So if I wanted to change the outline color on this circle, I could do that here from within the inspector. But it should be noted within your inspector, almost everything can be keyframed. So if you see a small gray diamond next to something, that means it can be keyframed. So if I wanted to keyframe the color of the fill here, I would click to add a keyframe. That'll change to a gold color. You'll also notice here down in the timeline, there is this red dot, and that is indicating that there is a keyframe happening. You can actually click and drag these directly on the timeline if you like. So I'm just going to move forward, and then I can create another keyframe by again clicking on that dot, and we can change this over to a red color. And Motion, I almost said Final Cut Pro, is going to automatically animate between those two keyframes for me. But if you wanted a lot more control with your keyframes, you can actually go into the keyframe editor. And I'm not going to get too in detail into this just yet, but in the keyframe editor, we can slide around our keyframes to wherever we like. You can also change the interpolation on them by right-clicking and setting stuff like Bezier and things like that. And that is one area that Motion is exceptionally powerful, and that is that you can really get in with your keyframes and really make them as smooth as possible. So I love that about Motion compared to Final Cut Pro. So again, I'll get more into the keyframe editor a little later, but that is just where you access it, is these 3 diamonds right here. Also, you'll notice that I've been shifting around the size of the windows. You can do that just like in Final Cut Pro. You can kind of click on these different segments and drag them to rescale them to your liking. So we have our timeline down here. You'll see your different layers here on the left side. You can also activate stuff like your parameter behaviors, your effects, and your alpha layers or your mask layers all in your layers panel here. And you can hide your layers within groups using this arrow next to the group. So just keep that in mind as you're trying to find stuff in your project. It might be hiding within a group layer. It might be deactivated by one of these 4 blue buttons here, or 3 blue buttons. Sorry, I'm still learning how to count. And then also you can deactivate and activate those things in the layers panel just above that right here. So just keep that in mind. If you're missing something that maybe in a tutorial I've shown and it's like I added this effect and it's not showing up, make sure it's activated here in this layers panel. And if you're really struggling, you can come over to the left and there's actually a search feature. So if you know the name of the filter or something like that, you can use that search feature to very, very quickly find it. Okay, looks like stream is still going strong. We're doing good. Okay. So within this layers panel, you can select your project and we can go to the properties of the project. And this is where you can actually change the resolution of the project, or you can change the duration of the project. You have options to set it as designed for 4K. So if you know for sure your template that you've created works in 4K, you can activate that checkbox. So there is a ton of options here, as well as time codes, all those important things, especially as you get more advanced with Motion, that you're gonna need to use. But at the very bottom is the motion blur settings. Now, currently I have no animation parameters here of my circle moving. I'm gonna go ahead and actually delete that first keyframes just so it stays red. So let's say we wanted to activate some motion blur. Well, I can do this a couple different ways. I could add in a keyframe here with the position. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. We'll add a keyframe and we'll move forward, and then I'll just move this way up to the side. And just like that, we have this nice animation. So it's moving up to the right side. But if I wanted to activate motion blur, you'll need to go up to your render settings and then go down to motion blur. This is gonna add in the motion blur. But I recommend that you do this at the end of your project, because motion blur is very, very computer intensive, even on an M1 computer or anything like that. Also, it should be noted that if your project has motion blur activated and you've created a title or an effect or even a transition, that motion blur is going to be applied in Final Cut Pro. So it's very important that you know that you want to have motion blur activated. So you can actually change some of the options with your motion blur. So if you want more blur, we could change our shutter angle. So you'll see how that's actually dragging out the blur. We could drag up our samples just like so. But again, this is going to be very computer intensive. So keep that in mind if you are working with motion blur, that you're probably going to want to do it at the very end. Or if you have the ability to use something like a directional blur, which I'll get into in the filters, that I recommend you maybe try that out. And if you can figure that out, it's going to be a lot less computer intensive and it's still going to have a great effect. I'm going to go ahead and deactivate the motion blur just like so. And so now we have this plain scene of our circle moving. Okay, so what we're going to do is I actually created, whoops, I don't want to delete that just yet. I'm going to go ahead and delete the type text here layer. We are going to create a real basic template for Final Cut Pro really quickly, and then a little bit later I want to get into actually using effects and motion tracking stuff, all sorts of really fun things like that. But let's go ahead and create a basic template, and I created a tutorial similar to this not that long ago, but there's extra features that I really wanted to cover in a more in-depth format. Okay, so we're going to create a basic subscribe button lower third. So let's go ahead and select our rectangle tool, and I'll click and drag that out in our scene. we'll go over into the shape settings here in the left side. And again, we're over here in the inspector, and I'm going to disable this outline. From there, we've got our fill options. But if I wanted to maybe round out these corners, then we would actually go over into the geometry settings. And we can drag up this roundness slider, and you'll see here on the edges how nicely that has rounded out our object. So now that I've got that set, we can actually come in here into the size settings and see the exact values that this rectangle is at. So I'm going to leave it at 1000 and maybe set this to something like 400. It doesn't really matter. You can do whatever you like. But later, I'm going to show you how you can link this over into text and make that much easier. So now that we've got our rectangle, let's go ahead and change the style of this over to red. And that's just going to look like our bright red subscribe button. Now that I've got the bright red subscribe button, I'm going to go ahead and add a text object, and you can get that with T. So now that I've created this text object, I'm just going to write something like subscribe, which I'm hoping most of you guys are, because you guys are legends and you're patrons, so thank you so much. But if you're not subscribed, that maybe that's even more legendary. I don't know. So anyway, so we've got the size of our subscribe button over here in our text parameters, and we'll go ahead and click and drag that. And something I wanted to add is you can actually keyframe stuff like the size and your tracking and everything here in motion. And that is not possible in Final Cut Pro. So that should be noted. It's very, very useful that you can do that. But I am going to show you later a way how you could publish these parameters to Final Cut Pro so you actually can animate them. Okay, so we've got our size here. We'll just drag that up. Maybe I'll set it to a nice even number of 150. Whoops, nope, I'm typing in the wrong area. So we'll just click on there. We've got it at 150. Now what I want is this rectangle object to always follow around our subscribe text. And what's awesome is when I publish this over to Final Cut Pro, this text is automatically editable. So if I wanted to click and drag this text around in Final Cut Pro, I would already be able to do that once I've saved this template. So if we wanted this rectangle to lock onto our subscribe button, you have various different options. The option I'm going to choose right now is a parameter behavior under the Behaviors menu, Basic Motion, and we'll select Align To. The Align To one is basically going to lock the object to whatever object we select. So I have my subscribe text here. I'm going to click and drag the subscribe text over into this well, and this well represents whatever the object is going to lock onto. And just like that, we've created a lock-on object, so now the subscribe text is actually moving our rectangle around. So that is really nice. But we do have an issue with this. If we want to maybe say like instead, you'll notice that the rectangle is still a lot larger than our text. So if we want the text to match the scale, then we're gonna need to use some link properties, or link parameter behaviors, I should say. So to do that, we'll select our rectangle object and we'll go into the geometry settings. In here, we'll find our width and our height. We're gonna need to link these two values over to the text. So if we come to the width parameter, you'll see this down arrow, and this down arrow is gonna give you so much power over every parameter in Apple Motion. So if we click this down arrow, we can go down to Add Parameter Behavior and select Link. The link parameter is incredibly powerful because not only can we link stuff like the position, but we can link the rotation, the scale, the color. I believe you can even maybe link the font. So you can link so many different aspects in motion so that if you have two objects that need to share the same value or something along those lines, then you can use the link to parameter. Okay, so we have the link object selected, but nothing is linking just yet. We'll go ahead and drag our text into this well. Now from there, we need to tell Motion what needs to be linked. So we have our source parameter right here. The source parameter is the original object that is being linked. So we want to link the scale of our text over to the rectangle object. So I'm going to change under compatible parameters, we're going to go to Object Attributes and select Size, and we'll select Width. So now the width of our text is linking to the width of our rectangle. Now let's go ahead and link the height. I'm gonna rename this to say link width. Then we'll push Command D to duplicate it. From there, I'm gonna double click that and we'll just rename this to link height. And now we'll change under the compatible parameters, object attributes, size, and again, we're changing the parameter of the text to link to the rectangle height. But right now, as it is, the object shape size width is being linked, so we need to change the target parameter over to target parameters. We'll go into object shape size and height. So now, as we change the text value, hello, how are you doing? The rectangle is being scaled out to the size of our text. So that is really, really handy. And if I change the scale on our text, it's going to work perfectly. So we now have this object that is linking both the position and the scale of the text, which is really, really powerful. And that is just barely scratching the surface of all the incredible stuff that motion can do. Now let's say if you look here at the edges, you'll see that the text is a little bit larger than our object. That's a very easy fix. If we go into the link parameters here, we can actually change our offset values. And by offsetting this, you can see how we can set the boundaries on this object. So again, I'll change the Y offset here. And just like that, we have our values perfectly set. So we can change the text on this to say whatever we like, and we should be set. Okay, so we've got this basic object that we want over in Final Cut Pro. And you'll see that I actually show this a lot on my channel. It's the publishing over to Final Cut. Let's go ahead and publish under our rectangle object. We'll go into the style and we'll publish the fill color. That'll make it so that we actually can change this in Final Cut Pro. So again, I was getting a little ahead of myself. Let's go ahead and push this down arrow. We'll click that and push publish. So now this rectangle will be able to have its color changed in Final Cut Pro. As well as, let's say we want to make it so we can publish the tracking and actually animate this in Final Cut Pro. Well, I'll go ahead, click this down arrow and push publish. And so now we have the ability to animate the tracking on this text directly in Final Cut. So we have those two things set. Let's go ahead and push Command S, and that's going to allow us to publish to Final Cut. And I will just call this subscribe tutorial. And we'll go ahead and jump into the category of our choosing. And categories are really powerful at organizing everything. So I'm gonna throw this into my tutorials category. And so if you wanna create a category, say you are making on-screen animations for your tutorials, because that's the only thing I know how to do apparently. But you're creating animations for your tutorials, you could create a category just for that specific thing. And now it's gonna be a lot easier in Final Cut Pro to find those exact value or those exact titles that you've created. Not only that, but you can set a theme, and this is going to further organize in Final Cut Pro. So I'm gonna actually create a new theme, and we'll just call this Patrons Rule, just like that. Now, underneath that, you have include unused media. Sometimes you're gonna bring in different media into motion. I honestly don't use the include unused media very frequently, but you can activate it here. There's also save preview movie. Now, this can be handy if you want to tax the computer system a little bit less. This is going to create a pre-rendered movie of whatever your project is in Final Cut Pro. So you know when you want to get kind of an idea of what the title is, it will play the movie and it's pre-rendered so your computer's not needing to activate all of its CPU. But we'll go ahead and leave that off and push publish. So now that that's published, we can go ahead and jump into Final Cut Pro. This is my latest tutorial that just came out this morning, but if we want to access this, we would just go into our tutorials and we can see our subscribe tutorial is right here. So I'm gonna click and drag that onto our timeline. And you'll notice that it is 10 seconds in length because that's the duration of the project we made. And we can click and drag this object directly in Final Cut Pro without needing to use the transform tool. Now there is something that I did intentionally, and that is I didn't delete the effect source. By not doing that, if I use the transform tool right now, you're going to notice how this is going to drag the entire background with it. So we've essentially created an adjustment layer in Final Cut Pro. So we definitely want to fix that, but hopefully that makes more sense why I didn't delete that just yet. So we're going to go back into Motion, find our title background, I guess is what it's called, not the effect source. Sorry, that was a mistake. So we'll go ahead, delete the title background, and that's going to give us this black background. I'll push Command S again. We'll jump back to Final Cut, and we either need to re-add the title or reload Final Cut Pro for it to update. So I'll go ahead and drag this back down. And so now if I use the transform tool, we are not affecting the background. So just keep that in mind. Find out if the template you're making, if you want it to actually affect the background or if you don't want that. If you don't want it, make sure you delete the title background, because otherwise when you add a transition or something onto this title, it's going to affect everything, and that can just cause a bunch of headache. Okay, so we now have this basic subscribe button, but I want to add some animation to this subscribe button. So we'll go ahead and go into our subscribe text. Now we could animate the subscribe lettering, and that would actually have the animation applied to our rectangle, or we can animate the whole group. And I'm going to recommend that you actually animate the whole group. It's going to be a little bit easier to work with. So we'll select our group and we'll go ahead and rename it by double clicking on it, and we can just call this subscribe button, just like so. And now we can go over to the left side and find our properties value. Now we are going to use parameter behaviors, and they're called parameter behaviors because they are behaviors, animations and stuff that affect the different parameters of your object. So let's say we want this subscribe text to pop in. We will find our scale parameter right here. We can click on this down arrow, add a parameter behavior, and we're going to select overshoot for today. This is one of my favorite ones. It's very nice and fluid, and it's just really easy to use. So now that we've added that, you'll notice that it added the overshoot parameter to our subscribe group. If you are not seeing your parameter behaviors, again, make sure that they are activated down here at the bottom, and it's going to be this gear icon. So you should now see your overshoot parameter. From there, we have options like the start value, the end value, ramp duration, cycles, acceleration, all sorts of things that you can really dive into and really maximize the customizability of your parameter. And also, it should be noted that all of these can be published to Final Cut Pro. So if you want to give your user full control over how they work with a specific parameter, then you can publish that, and it's going to be a lot easier for them to activate these parameter behaviors. So what we're going to do is actually animate this subscribe text popping in. So to do that, we'll find our start value. Now it's set to 0%. That doesn't mean that this is starting from a 0% value. That means that it is affecting our group by 0%. So we want this to affect the group by 100% to completely negate the 100% value, which is found here. The scale is set to 100%. So we want to completely negate that and set that to negative 100%. So now we have negated it, and now it is completely zeroed out. You'll see here as I play through, the animation is going to play out over the full 10-second duration. And that might be exactly what you want, but if you want to speed it up, you have a few different options here. My favorite option, whenever it's possible, is to just shorten it on the timeline. So if we go forward 1 second with our overshoot parameter selected, we can push O. O stands for out, so it's going to trim it down and set the out point of that value. So now if we play through, the animation is happening much faster rather than taking a full 10 seconds to play out. However, sometimes you're going to be in a situation where you can't just trim down the parameter behavior. If you're ever in one of those positions, you can actually just go to the 1 second mark and find this end offset parameter. If we push Command 8, hopefully this shows up okay on the stream. It's going to be a little bit small, but you should see Command 8 gives us the keyframe editor once again, and you can activate that once more with these 3 diamonds. You'll see the animation is playing out over the entire keyframe editor. What we can do is find this end offset value and click and drag that all the way up until the value is to where we want it. Now, it's only going to go up to 100, but don't worry, you can actually click directly on the parameter and drag upwards to speed that up. So now we can go well beyond the 100 parameter that was there. So I'll just drag this all the way up so that the animation plays out over 1 second. So now if we play through, the animation's happening at that 1 second mark. And if you want to give your user the ability to shorten an animation, this is the value that you're going to want to actually publish. So you would just come over here, click this down arrow and push publish. And so now your user is going to have full customizability over how short or long this animation is. So that can be very, very useful in the long run. However, it might be a little bit confusing for them to look at this and see that the value is 262. They aren't going to know what does 262 mean. So that is why you would use something like a rig. So to use a rig, we'll go ahead and click on this down arrow again. We'll select add to rig, create new rig, and we are going to select the slider. The slider rig can be great because you can set exact values for different positions on your rig. So let's say we want the far left side to actually be 0 seconds. I'm going to push command, there we go. And then we're gonna go back to the behaviors menu and it's not showing up for me. So we're just gonna have to play this by ear. I don't know why it's not working right now. I'm still learning motion, so there you go. Anyway, so if we wanted this to be 0 seconds in length, we could go to the overshoot menu and with our slider dragged all the way to 0, looking at the overshoot, we'll just go ahead and keep dragging this up until that represents 0 seconds. So it looks like 300 is probably a good spot, and we now have this nice straight line. So now that animation is going to take 0 seconds to play out. We'll go back to our slider and drag the slider all the way to the far right side, and you'll see there's these 2 indications, this left side and this right side. These different indicators show where you can actually adjust a value. So if I have this in the middle, I actually can't adjust the values at all. I need to make sure I'm at one of the 2 ends. So now that we're at the far right, we can go ahead and set this subscribe button to the correct value so that it plays out over the full 10 seconds. So we'll go back to the overshoot parameter, and I'm going to drag the end offset down to 0 so that the animation plays out over the full 10 seconds. So now our user, once we've published this, which is very important, make sure you publish it. So I'll push the down arrow and publish. The user is going to have the ability to set a duration over those full 10 seconds, but we need to make it so that they can understand what it's doing. So if we want this to say it's in seconds, we could actually come down to the range maximum option, and I'll just set this to 10. That means that our slider has the ability to go from 0 seconds to 10 seconds. So now it's going to make a little bit more sense when you publish this to Final Cut Pro. Additionally, we could change the name of the slider to make more sense. So we could just double click on the slider and write time in seconds, just like so. Okay, so we now have the understanding that it's going to take 10 seconds for this animation to play out. Let's go ahead and set the default down to 1 second. And now when we push Command S, that is the default that Final Cut Pro is going to see this project. So when I open up Final Cut Pro, and if I ever reapply this subscribe button, just like so, we can go into the title parameters. You'll see we can change the color like we made it earlier. We can also change the tracking on our text, and you'll notice we can add an animation parameter. We can change, you'll see the end offset is here. I should have unpublished that, but we'll see this slider down below, and we can set that from 0 to 10 seconds. And for some reason, it didn't change the name on it, so we'll go back to motion. Oh, and that's what I did wrong. I published it a little bit too early. So we'll go to the project settings, and in the project settings, you can actually see all of the different values that you have published. So you see the fill color, tracking, end offset. So I'm gonna go ahead, click on this down arrow, and unpublish the end offset. We'll find our slider parameter, and I'll double click that and change it to time in seconds, just like so, Command S. And so now in Final Cut Pro, we'll go ahead and reload that. We can change this over to 10 seconds, and it's going to take that full 10-second duration to play out. Then I can set this back to 1 second, and it'll just play out in 1 second. So that can be really handy. However, there is still a problem that we need to kind of think about. When we have this at 10 seconds, currently as it is, Motion sees this as one project that it can either extend or shrink down. So what I mean by that is if I put this at 10 seconds, but I shorten this title down all the way to just over a second, it's going to play out over just 1 second. That can be good in some circumstances, but we want to make sure that the timing is always exactly the same. So to do that, we'll go back to Motion, and we're gonna need to set in points and out points for the animation. So I'm gonna just do the in point for right now, but it's the exact same for an out point. So if you wanted your in animation to only take 2 seconds, you would set this at the 2 second mark. I want the ability to set this all the way up to 10 seconds like we did. So I'm going to come to the very end, and I'm going to push Shift M. That's going to create this small green marker. And I wish I could zoom in on it, but it is there. And we'll go ahead and double click. And you'll see here under the marker settings, we can change the color. So if you really want to theme it up, turn it red, whatever you want to do, you can do just that. It's very helpful for setting different marker colors. But more importantly is the type. This type is extremely important to creating a template. So if we wanted to change the type from standard, we're going to look at these different options. We have build-in mandatory and build-in optional, as well as build-out mandatory, build-out optional, project loop, and poster frame. Build-in is going to let you set the in duration for your animation. And I actually created a tutorial not that long ago showing how to fix a title in Final Cut Pro that had this issue. So if we set this to build-in optional, and we can push OK. What that has done is, maybe I'll drag this over so we can see it a little better. You'll see how it's created this gold line. So anything that doesn't have that gold line is the in animation in Motion. So in Final Cut Pro, you cannot adjust the duration of that in animation. It always is going to be exactly, I just currently set it to 7 seconds and 9 frames. So it will always be 7 seconds and 9 frames. No matter how long I set the duration of the title, it will always take 7 seconds and 9 frames. But we also have it set to build-in optional. What build-in optional allows us to do is, you'll see here with my project selected, we have this build-in checkbox. We can actually disable that in Final Cut Pro. So now we will not have any sort of in animation at all. It's going to immediately start your title directly off right here at 7 seconds and 9 frames. So it's going to skip the entire beginning of your title. So that can be very, very useful if you have the options of maybe you have different animations flying in for a title, but you want to give your user the ability to disable that and just have the title with its box or whatever you created. You can do that using these different markers. Now, there's also the ability, I'll double click that again, to change the type from built-in to build-in mandatory. That means that they will not have the option to disable the in animation. So if you always want it to have that animation, make sure you use build-in mandatory. I almost always use build-in optional because it's very likely that your user wants the ability to disable it, but that's totally up to you. Now, you'll also see the project loop end. If you have a project that you want to loop rather than having a set in animation, then you can set it to project loop end. That means that when Motion hits this exact point, it's just going to go back to the beginning, or I should say Final Cut. When Final Cut gets to this point, it will restart the animation and play over and over again. So this can be helpful if you create something like a hover animation, or if you have a background that's kind of slowly drifting back and forth. You can set that loop so that you can drag out your project as long as you want in Final Cut Pro, but it's still going to maintain the timing that you set in Apple Motion. The last one we have here is the poster frame. The poster frame is the frame that shows up in Final Cut Pro as the thumbnail. So while we're looking at it, I'll go ahead and drag this poster frame over to the beginning here, and it should be noted you can actually drag around markers in Apple Motion. So I'll drag the poster frame to a different point here, maybe when it's really tiny. I'll push Command S, we'll go into Final Cut Pro, and I'm gonna need to refresh my tutorials, but we'll see our subscribe tutorial button right here. And you'll look at it and notice how small that thumbnail is now that I've changed the poster frame. So if you want to very clearly showcase exactly what's happening in your title, you can do that by setting your poster frame. So hopefully that makes sense. That's kind of the basics of creating templates in Apple Motion for Final Cut Pro. So it just really comes down to finding the things that you want to publish over into Final Cut Pro. And you can get very, very granular. It's very surprising the amount of stuff you can actually publish to Final Cut Pro. So with that being said, I think I should probably start jumping into some effects and how to do some motion tracking and stuff like that. But those are the basics of creating your templates. I think templates are possibly the most powerful area with Apple Motion, but it does have some really, really amazing different effects tools as well. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this project. We'll hide this and we'll open a new Apple Motion project if it ever decides to load here. And hopefully, Billy, I think I have one actually, Billy. I might do that in the future. I might create a better one because that one's pretty basic. But yes, that's the idea. I don't know why Motion is not opening. Hello. Maybe I'll just fully quit it. We'll try one more time here. And that is why live is so great. Hopefully everything's looking good over here. We'll just check the stream health. That's okay. It put it on the wrong screen. Okay, so we're back in our project browser. Let's say that I want to do some effects work and I don't want to create a special effect that I'm going to publish to Final Cut or anything like that. What we can do is go down to import as project, and then I'm going to locate the footage that I want to work with. So I have this footage of me. This is some of my finest, most cinematic footage I think I've ever done. So you guys should congratulate me over in the text. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and trim that with I to set that in point, and we'll drag this back to the beginning, and then I'm going to set the project duration down to the end there. So let's say I wanted to give me some really nice bulgy eyes. In Final Cut, you could do it manually, but it's going to take a lot of work. And that is one thing that Motion is really powerful at, is actually motion tracking specific effects. So with the footage of me selected, I'll go up to Filters and I'll go to Distortion, and then I'm going to select Bulge. So we now have this bulge filter, and I'm going to put this directly over my eye and shrink it down to taste here. Okay, so now that we've done that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in the inspector. If I wanted to motion track this, it's very, very easy in Motion. Anything that has this position parameter, so this center parameter here on the bulge filter, can actually be motion tracked. So if I click on this down arrow, we can go to Add Parameter Behavior and select Track. And this is going to use the object tracker in Motion, or if you don't have the object tracker update, it will use the point tracker. And if you ever want to switch between the two, you have your different modes. We have object tracker and point tracker. The object tracker is generally better if you can do it, but there are specific moments where the point tracker is better. For example, if you want to change a screen on a green screen computer or something like that, that is where I would use the point tracker. Okay, so we have our tracker set up. You can see it here directly in our frame. All I'm gonna do is push Analyze, and Motion's gonna go through and track my eyeball. And you'll see when it's tracking forward, it's actually already applying the effect, which is nice. If it tracks backwards, it won't apply that effect until it's done. But we can now see that I've applied this bulge filter onto my eye just like so, and it's really locked on there really quite nicely. We can now go into the bulge filter. We can change the amount. We could change the scale, so if we wanted to give me these really crazy alien eyes, we could do that. And I'm going to push Command and Slash to actually disable the on-screen controls there for a second. So you can see the power that can come with this. Not only can you track on different distortion effects in Motion, but you can also track in masks, which is really nice. In Final Cut, you can track shape masks, which is great. I'm glad they added that. But you can't track intricate masks, and that's something that motion is really good at. So I'm gonna do just kind of a really crazy effect just to get this across. So what I'm gonna do is go on up into filters, and we're going to locate the distortion filter, and I'm gonna use the scrape. So you'll see how that's actually like stretching my head straight up. And I'll go ahead and select this scrape, and I'll push Command and slash so that we can get that set. And I'm just gonna grab and put the scrape effect directly over my head, just like so. Now I'm gonna go ahead and track this, add parameter behavior, and we'll do track. And again, this is just a really crazy, bizarre effect. And what I'm gonna also do is actually just have it track my entire face. So we're gonna go over to the detect settings and change it to faces, and then I can click and drag this over my face, and now it will track it. We'll go ahead and analyze that, and now the scrape effect is tracking to my head, and we'll just let it do its thing. Truly a cinematic masterpiece. I'm very proud of this. So yeah. Okay, so we now have that tracked. But let's say I want the background to be totally normal, and I just want my head stretched up like that. Well, with my footage selected, we'll come down here to this option, and this is actually your masking tools. If you click this down arrow, we can actually get the Bezier mask. I'm just gonna do a quick mask around my head all the way up here, and I'll push Command minus to zoom out a little bit, and we'll just go ahead and round that out, and then we'll click and bring it back down on this side, just like so. Perfect. And I made a mistake because this is live, so I actually want to add another layer that we can affect. So I should have done that first. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to push K to create a clone layer, and I'm going to drag the scrape effect onto that clone layer, as well as the Bezier mask, just like so. So we now have our clone layer, which anything we apply to the clone layer will not affect our original layer. Anything we apply to the original layer, like color or something along those lines, will affect the clone layer. So it's really nice to use within your effects the clone layers, so that if you ever make a color adjustment across the board, it's going to affect your effects as well. You can also do a duplicate layer, which is its own entity. So it's a duplicate. Honestly, it makes a little less sense to me to call it duplicate, but it's its own object. So any effects I apply to that duplicate will not affect the original layer, and anything I do to the original layer will not affect the duplicate. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So we've got our clone layer, it's got this mask, and I want to actually track this mask on. So we'll select that mask and come back over to the position parameter. We'll click this down arrow and we'll select track. Now, I've already got this tracked object from the scrape effect, so I can actually just click and drag this tracker into this well, and so now those tracking parameters have been applied to our mask. And so it's a little bit off, so we'll go ahead and adjust it. We'll just drag it over to my face there, and we should be good to go. So we now have this really bizarre effect where my head is just like stretched upwards, but it's only happening to my head. Now we could also go into this Bezier mask, go to the mask settings and feather it out a bit. You could adjust the fall off, anything you need like that. You can also animate these mask points just like in Final Cut Pro with the draw mask. So if I double click on this, you can see the different control points here. And again, I wish I could zoom in. I'm sorry, it's kind of small, but you can actually animate these. If we go over to the control point setting under our mask inspector, we can add a keyframe and move a point to wherever we need it to be. So you can just remember that. You can animate these different masks. You can track the mask directly onto different objects. So if you have a complex mask where you're like tracking a tree or something and you want text to fly in behind the tree, you could track it rather than manually rotoscoping it. So that is super powerful in motion and one of my favorite features that it has. So that's kind of the basics of, applying effects to motion. Just remember, it's really powerful because you can track the different distortion effects directly in motion. And one other area, I actually didn't get to test this before, so hopefully it works out, but I'm gonna bring in this other object, and let's say I wanted to maybe give this video that mirror effect where it's like the land is both above and below the horizon, what we can do, I'll drag this down actually, we'll go into filters, we'll go to distortion, and again, I really hope this works because I didn't get to quite test it. We'll set our mirror and we'll change the angle on it so that it's just directly up and down. And I want this to go the opposite direction, so I might need to drag this all the way up. Probably 280 is probably the number it's looking for. Nope, 290 I mean. It's live, I don't know. 260? 255, I don't know. We'll get it. I'm bad at math, guys, so forgive me. 270, that's the one. I skipped all of the correct ones. Okay, so let's say we wanted this to kind of mirror up towards the top. And I'm actually gonna select this group and we'll see if I can fix this. Nope, it's not working for me. That's okay. Okay. So I've got this mirror effect and we could actually track this mirror effect directly onto our scene once again. So I'll select add parameter behavior, select track, and we can just find an object here. And I wish I could have tested this. It's probably gonna fail miserably, but you get the idea. You can get really, really creative with these different effects by tracking them in just like so. Yeah, it's not working as well as I'd hoped. But if you finessed it, if you used maybe the point tracker, you would maybe get better results. So anyway, that is the basics of using motion, but it is so insanely powerful. And I want to do more of these courses where I get a lot more advanced because there's stuff that's just like absolutely mind-blowing and so exciting. I really, really love it. I'm going to go ahead and let's see, I'm going to switch over to my face cam. We'll transition there. So yeah, that's the idea behind motion. Really, really powerful, and I'm so excited a lot of you are starting out in motion. Again, I only started it 2 years ago because of my channel. I wanted to create templates, and it's just opened up Pandora's box with the amazing amount of stuff you can do with motion. And I think that's kind of the main key takeaway with motion is you need to look at it and think of how can I use this program outside of the box? How can I take the trackers and break them slightly so that it really helps me create a better template or something like that? So that's how you can create different on-screen controls and stuff in motion. And I actually created a really quick tutorial on Ripple Training's channel if you want to go check out that video where I show how to create some really handy on-screen controls. So it's just really, really powerful, really exciting. And yeah, so anyway, I'm going to kind of roll into some questions. I need some water though. So we'll go to my Q&A screen. Let's see. Hopefully this works. There we go. Looks like it's working. And I'm going to try and load up. Bear with me for a split second here. Interact. Make it so I can read the chat. Okay. I've got the chat here. And I am, oh good, you guys can see this. I want to, yes, I've used motion. Oh, I broke it. Oh no, oh no. Of course. Oh no. Okay, we're gonna go a different route with this. I'm gonna drag this chat on here. Bear with me. Don't you just love live? Okay. I broke it. So hopefully we'll go ahead and do that. So I'm going to try and find the questions, and feel free to ask more questions right now. That's always super handy. So I'll push command, and let's see if I can do this. Q. Dang it, it's not working like it worked in testing. Okay. So I'm scrolling through. Audio's good. Countdown's on sync. Good. Oh, thank you, Paul, for letting me know about the finding your questions. That's super helpful. Hey, thank you, Doc Rock, for letting everybody know to push like. Oh yeah, Billy, yeah. So I do want to create, I actually want to create a better template. I want to create a nice like button, a subscribe button. And maybe if I can, some Instagram and Twitter and whatever the social media platforms are, TikTok, I guess. Little animations for you. That's the hope and plan in the future. So yeah. The end paper. So to learn motion, I started out watching as much Ripple training as I could, but I was, motion's not really well, it's not really well covered. So you have a few small channels that are kind of covering it, and then you got Ripple Training, which is excellent. But these small channels really deserve to get a lot more views, but people aren't really searching motion. I'm trying to bring more awareness to it. And so when I wanted to learn motion, I was watching as many tutorials as I could. And then I was literally just reading the help manual because I really wanted to learn it and to realize its full potential. So it was extremely boring, but I was just reading the help manual, and it helped get me through. So that was kind of how it was. Are you guys able to read these chat messages okay? I kind of wish they were larger. Maybe I can zoom in. There we go. Maurice says, I'm often faced with creating lower thirds for names and persons filmed combined with logo coming from graphics agent. Is there an easy way to get it quickly looking awesome? Oh, Maurice, okay. What I would do, when you're working with lower thirds, that is something that Motion's really good at. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. So Motion has text parameters. So if I put in subscribe and I really want this subscribe text to look to be really fancy when it animates in, you can go up to behaviors, and there are so many different text animations pre-built. So if I wanted to do arrange in, this would be a great way to get your lower thirds looking really fancy, is to bring in the nice animation values and to use parameter behaviors like overshoot or ramp. Logarithmic is really good, and once you learn how to use it, it's really powerful. So yeah, I would just try adding a little pizzazz and animation, using those parameter behaviors, using the different text animations here. If you want to build your own custom text animation, then you're going to want to take a look at sequence text. And sequence text is essentially what these text animations are, but it's completely stripped of everything. So if you wanted to make it, so let's say I want to add a format and we want this to scale in, I could set the scale to 0%. And so now each of these different letters are going to scale in accordingly. And we can actually set up the speed to be quite a bit faster. So I'll push O to trim that down. And so now our animation's happening faster. And just like that, I've created this really fancy looking text animation. I've barely even touched the other parameters, so we could adjust spread just like that. So it's really, really powerful. We can change it to be character, word, or line, just like so. So it takes a lot of playing around. I want to do more in-depth tutorials on this specific thing, but it's crazy powerful how cool you can make your animations, because you can mess with, rotation and stuff, all of that. So now they're all going to rotate in, and yeah, it's super crazy. This is a bad example, but you get the idea. So I would mess around with playing with those text animations. If you don't like them, you can actually adjust them just like you would with the sequence text. You can actually come in and change the different values and get it looking exactly how you want. Okay, let's go to the questions. Here we go. Oh yeah, the end paper. Yeah, reading that manual is crazy. Yes, Billy, it is possible. So, unfortunately, it creates a copy. But if I go into Final Cut, and I'll just load up 3D. Let's see. Well, let's say we want to adjust their scale 3D. You could right-click and actually do Open a Copy in Motion. It's going to create a duplicate copy, but it's going to have all the parameters that you need, and you can see exactly how they built it, which is really nice. Another one that I was actually looking at was the handheld feature. Now, I created like a real handheld, I motion tracked real footage. I made those different values here. So, but I wanted to see like what is wrong with Final Cut's handheld parameters. When I apply it, it's like it has this weird animation after 10 seconds that happens, and it was driving me crazy. So I opened it up, and I was looking, and I realized it's like their link animation at the end. They added these values to get it so that the video would always land in the exact same spot. And it was eye-opening to see like how they did it and how I might apply that to something else. But it also showed me kind of the major flaw of how they built it and how I might do it better. So So I figured out some workarounds. I want to create a tutorial on improving the handheld tool that's built into Motion or into Final Cut Pro. But yeah, it's actually really eye-opening when you can open up a Motion project and just see how things are built. The ones I send out on Patreon, I make sure they're always unlocked and able for you to take a look at. That's just part of the learning experience, I think. But it's also important not to just steal somebody's Motion project, so make sure you're not doing that. But yeah, I think it's super powerful to be able to take a look at those. And yes, you can modify the stock ones. Oh, like building up those logos. Okay, Maurice, yeah, that's just gonna come through in animation. It's that follow through animation that makes things feel really good. So I would just, the overshoot animation is your friend, because it's got that nice smooth flow to it. So so when you've got that lower third, have it animated, and with the overshoot, it's gonna kind of pop in and bounce back and stuff. Looks really great. That's my favorite animation. Or you could do the scale one as well. Oh, great question. Okay, how can I provide templates for multiple display formats? Okay, so if we're in Motion, it's a little bit confusing, but once you figure it out, it's great. So if you go to your project settings and go to Inspector, and it's under Project, you'll see Snapshots. So if you look at snapshots, you can see how there is a 9:16 format, 1:1, 4:3, and 16:9. If you want to create a new format, say I'll click Add, and say I wanted to make it 4:3, I could click that. Then you're going to want to push this Edit Snapshot button and jump in and change the settings that are required to make it format to that 4:3. So that when somebody applies it, it's automatically going to shift all the settings in Final Cut Pro to that 4:3 aspect ratio. And then when you're done changing the settings, like if you're changing, maybe the position is different and maybe the scaling options are different because it's a smaller box or something, you would change those values and then go to Stop Rig Edit Mode. And so now when you're in here, you can switch between the different snapshots and get the different values looking how you need them. So that's the idea of creating multiple templates for multiple aspect ratios. Whew, drink some more water. I'm so glad you guys were able to stop by. This is super fun, and I definitely want to do more of this. So I'm bummed my chat window didn't work out, but took all this time to make that fancy graphic, and it just totally miserably failed, I guess. So I'm trying to think of if I know there's so many things in Motion I want to cover. And I, you know what, I'm going to do one more thing. And then you guys can ask me some more questions. I'll come back. Okay, so if we go let's go into Motion. I'm going to show how to create on-screen controls. Because on-screen controls are what really separate a good template from a bad one, I think. I think that they make them a lot more professional. I think people are a lot more willing to purchase your plugins if you have these on-screen controls. So if we go, we're going to do a Final Cut effect this time, and I'll leave these at whatever. So let's say we want to make it so that the person can scale, rotate, and move around the actual effect source. So it's not using the transform tools in Final Cut. This is probably not a great example, but you can apply this to literally anything. So if you want to make something grabbable directly in Final Cut Pro, this is how you would do it. So we have our effect source here. We'll go over into our generators and we'll find the color solid. The color solid is recommended. Oh yeah, I am showing my screen. Okay, the color solid is recommended because it takes very little processing power, and so it's a really good one to use. You can use other options, but the color solid is generally solid, so mind the pun. Okay, we're going to disable that color solid. Now, if we want the color solid to have on-screen controls that we can affect this effect source, we can't just like publish on-screen controls from the effect source. So we actually have to do kind of a hack. And this isn't stuff I came up with, this is just stuff I've learned. Okay, so the color solid, we'll go up to filters, and we typically use the distortion filters because they have great on-screen controls and they have a lot of versatility. So we go to our distortion options, and I'm going to use the twirl option because the twirl option has the scaling here, it has rotation, and it also has position. So it's really powerful. Selecting our effect source, we'll go to the inspector and go to the properties, and we're first going to link the position. So we'll click this down arrow, and it's important that you do this separately. You can't apply all of your position parameters at the same time. It's a little bit of annoying, but it is something you have to do. So you got your X, Y, and Z values. We just want to link X and Y. So we'll click this down arrow, add a parameter behavior, and we're going to link that. We're going to drag the color solid into this well, and by default, it's going to take the properties transform position X, and that's not what we want. What we want is the position from the twirl effect. So to do that, we're going to come into the compatible parameters, click this, and change it down to filters. We're going to go into the twirl options and locate the center. So we'll set the X center. Now you'll notice that has pushed it off to the side. So to fix that, we need to offset it. So we'll offset it by -0.5. And that is because if we take a look at the twirl, the center says 0 by 0 pixels, but it's actually wrong. If you click this down arrow, you can see that it's 0.5 pixels. So we need to offset that 0.5 pixels to get it to lock directly in the center. I don't know why that is, but it's just something you have to do. Okay, so we have our X value. I'll push Command D, and we'll go ahead and change this to link Y position. And I should have renamed the other one, but we'll just keep this flowing. Okay, so now we'll go compatible parameters, filters, twirl, center, Y, and then we'll change the target parameter to properties because it's the property of the effect source. We'll go to transform, position, and Y. So now the Y position is being affected by the twirl, and we're going to need to again offset that by -0.5. Okay, so what's great is we have this on-screen control that we can click and drag our object around. Now let's say we wanted to apply the scale. Well, that comes down to the amount slider, and I'll set this to actually 0.1. That'll keep it nice and small. So now that we've got that, we can go back to our effect source and locate the scale, and we're going to click this down arrow, and you can do this to the scale all at once, which is great. So we'll go to, oh wait, no you can't. Bad info. Okay, click this down arrow. We're gonna have to do X and Y separately, unfortunately. Click this down arrow. We're gonna link the scale on this as well. So we'll drag in that color solid once again. We're gonna change the parameter over to filters, twirl, and amount. And so the amount of the twirl is going to affect the scale of the X value. But you'll see it's really small. So we're going to need to offset that by 10. And that's because in the twirl settings, I set it to 0.1. So 0.1 times 10 equals 1. So that is why we need to offset it. And instead of using the offset, we actually used the scale parameter. So the offset would do stuff a little bit differently. So I generally use the scale for the actual scale object. Well, Command D, we'll do this one more time. Properties, transform, scale, and Y. And what's great is the filter is already set to filters, twirl, amount, and they have the same aspect. It's not X and Y, so you don't need to change anything. So now if we look at the twirl, we can actually scale this down, scale it up, however we need. The last one would be rotation. So we'll find this twirl parameter. We'll go to our effects, rotation, and we want this to be on the Z axis. So we'll click add a parameter behavior. We will link that, color solid, and this time we're going to change it filters, twirl, and we're going to select the twirl parameter, and it's rotating it, and that's because if we look at the twirl parameter, you can see it's at 180 degrees. So we'll go to our link and we'll change this offset to -180, and it should be set. So now we can actually rotate this, we can scale it up, we can move it around. Now, if we go over here, we can publish the on-screen controls. It's very important you click that and it'll show up in Final Cut. We'll push Command S, and we can just call this Transformer Robot in Disguise. We'll change the category. I'll throw it in tutorial. We'll publish that. We'll go into Final Cut. We'll look up my transformer. And now here it is. And now I can move this around however I need, I can scale it, and I can rotate it. So again, you can apply that to different objects that you have in motion. So you could apply it to your lower third, you could apply it to how big a lens flare is or something like that. So just keep that in mind. It's really handy to build those on-screen controls. They take a lot of time, but it saves you so much more time in the end rather than needing to use the transform tool. And it also helps rather than like when you get on the edges, it actually, if you have an object that is slightly out of the edge, I'm not explaining this very clearly, but if you have like a rectangle slightly out of the edge, rather than just being cut off at the edge, it will actually drag it in to the scene really nicely. So anyway, I think I'm gonna wrap up this video. I'm gonna do like a few more questions, and let me switch my screen back over here. Let's see. Oh, good. Oh, I should. Yeah, Paul, you're right. I should try Ecamm. I'm stuck on OBS. I keep hearing how I need to use Ecamm. So anyway, this was so much fun. I'm really glad we got to do this. I'm going to try and create I'm going to try and do chapter markers so that you can come back and rewatch this, because I know I'm moving fast. I'm trying to get a lot of info into a short amount of time. So I'm going to try and set that up. It should take me, you know, a few minutes here to find all the points and to get everything processed. But yeah, I'm super glad. Billy, I do not know yet. I wanted to see how well this one went. It went exceedingly well. Thank you to all of you. I guess I can go back to the face cam. There we go. I need Ecamm. So I don't know when the next live stream is going to be, but I'm hoping really soon, because I really love this. I want to do more courses, more advanced stuff in motion, and I also want to do more breakdowns in Final Cut Pro. So thank you everybody again for your amazing support on Patreon. It really does make it possible for me to do what I love doing, doing this YouTube channel. It's a dream come true. I'm so grateful. So hopefully you guys feel like this is enough thanks that I can give with this live stream. And with that being said, I cannot wait to see you in the next one. I do have a new video that just dropped this morning about Apple Motion, creating a ProMIS filter, if you're interested in seeing that. So yeah. Thank you, everybody. You're amazing, and I cannot wait to see you next time. We'll talk later. My voice is gone.